Hello and welcome back to my blog. This is Sophisms of the Protectionists by the late M. Frederick Bastiat. Introduction to the first edition, part 2. As these pages are going through the press, a telegram announces that the French government has abolished the discriminating duties levied upon goods imported in foreign bottoms, and has asked our government to abolish the like discrimination which our laws have created. Commercial freedom is making rapid progress in Prussia, Austria, Italy, and even in Spain. The United States alone, among civilized nations, hold to the opposite principle. Our anomalous position in this respect is due, as I think, to our anomalous condition during the past 8 or 9 years already adverted to, a condition in which the protected classes have been restrained by no public opinion being too intensely preoccupied with the means of preserving the national existence to notice what was doing with the tariff. But evidences of a reawakening are not wanting. There is scarcely an argument current among the protectionists of the United States that was not current in France at the time Bastiat wrote the Sophismes économiques. I can't do the French anyway. Nor was there one current in his time that is not performing its bad office among us. Hence, his demonstrations of their absurdity and falsity are equally applicable to our time and country as to his. They may have even greater force among us if they thoroughly dispel the notion that protection is an American system. Surely they cannot do less than this. There are one or two arguments current among the protectionists of the United States that were not rife in France when Bastiat wrote his Sophismes. It is said, for instance, that protection has failed to achieve all the good results expected from it because the policy of the government has been variable. If we could have a steady course of protection for a sufficient period of time, nobody being bold enough to say what time would be sufficient, and could be assured of having it, we should see wonderful progress. But inasmuch as the policy of the government is uncertain, protection has never yet had a fair trial. This is like saying, if the stone which I threw in the air had stayed there, my head would not have been broken by its fall. It would not stay there. The law of gravitation is committed against its staying there. Its only resting place is on the earth. They begin by violating natural laws and natural rights, the right to exchange services for services, and then complain because these natural laws war against them and finally overcome them. But it is not true that protection has not had a fair trial in the United States. The protection has been greater at some times than at others, that is all. Prior to the late war, all our revenue was raised from customs, and while the tariffs of 1846 and 1857 were designated free trade tariffs to distinguish them from those existing before and since, they were necessarily protective to a certain extent. Again, it is said that there is need of diversifying our industry, as though industry would not diversify itself sufficiently through the diverse tastes and predilections of individuals, as though it were necessary to supplement the work of the Creator in this behalf by human enactments founded upon reciprocal rapine. The only rational object of diversifying industry is to make people better and happier. Do men and women become better and happier by being huddled together in mills and factories in a stifling atmosphere on scanty wages 10 hours each day and 313 days each year than when cultivating our free and fertile lands? Do they have equal opportunities for mental and moral improvement? The trades unions tell us no. Whatever may be the experience of other countries where the land is either owned by absentee lords who take all the product except what is necessary to give the tenant a bare subsistence, or where it is cut up in parcels not larger than an American garden patch, it is an undeniable fact that no other class of American working men are so independent, so intelligent, so well provided with comforts and leisure, or so rapidly advancing in prosperity as our agriculturists. And this notwithstanding, they are enormously overtaxed to maintain other branches of industry which, according to the protective theory, cannot support themselves. The natural tendency of our people to flock to the cities, where their eyes and ears are gratified at the expense of their other senses, physical and moral, is sufficiently marked not to need the influence of legislation to stimulate it. It is not the purpose of this preface to anticipate the admirable arguments of M. Bastiat, but there is another theory in vogue which deserves a moment's consideration. Mr. H.C. Carey tells us that a country which exports its food in reality exports its soil, the foreign consumers not giving back to the land the fertilizing elements abstracted from it. Mr. Mill has answered this argument upon philosophical principles at some length, showing that whenever it ceases to be advantageous to America to export breadstuffs, she will cease to do so. Also, that whenever it becomes necessary to manure her lands, she will either import manure or make it at home. A shorter answer is that the lands are no better manured by having the bread consumed in Lowell or Pittsburgh or even in Chicago than in Birmingham or Lyons. But it seems to me that Mr. Carey does not take into account the fact that the total amount of breadstuffs exported from any country must be an exceedingly small fraction of the whole amount taken from the soil, and scarcely appreciable as a source of manure, even if it were practically utilized in that way. Thus, our exportation of flour and meal, wheat and Indian corn for the year 1860, as compared with the total crop produced, was as follows. Total crop, blah, blah, percentage of exportation to total crop. Flour and meal, 5.15%. Wheat bushels, 2.4%. Corn bushels, 0.39%. This was the result for the year preceding the enactment of the Morrill Tariff. It is true that our exports of wheat and Indian corn rose in the 3 years following the enactment of the Morrill Tariff, from an average of 8 million bushels to an average of 46 million bushels, but this is contrary to the theory that high tariffs tend to keep breadstuffs at home and low ones to send them abroad. There is need of great caution in making generalizations as to the influence of tariffs on the movement of breadstuffs. Good or bad harvests in various countries exercise an uncontrollable influence upon their movement, far beyond the reach of any legislation short of prohibition. The market for breadstuffs in the world is as the number of consumers, that is, of population. It is sometimes said in the way of reproach, and it is a curious travesty of Mr. Carey's manure argument, that foreign nations will not take our breadstuffs. It is not true, but if it were, that would not be a good reason for our passing laws to prevent them from doing so, that is, to deprive them of the means to pay for them. Every country must pay for its imports with exports. It must pay for the services which it receives with the services which it renders. If foreign nations are not allowed to render services to us, how shall we render them the service of bread? The first series of Bastiat's Sophisms were published in 1845, and the second series in 1848. The first series were translated in 1848 by Mrs. D.J. McCord and published the same year by G.P. Putnam, New York. Mrs. McCord's excellent translation has been followed, by permission of her publisher, who holds the copyright, in this volume, having been first compared with the original in the Paris edition of 1863. A very few verbal alterations have been made, which, however, have no bearing on the accuracy and faithfulness of her work. The translation of the essay on capital and interest is from a 12º volume published in London a year or two ago, the name of the translator being unknown to me. The second series of the Sophisms and the essay entitled Spoliation and Law are, I believe, presented in English for the first time in these pages. H.W. Chicago, August 1st, 1869. That's the end of the introduction. Make it a great day, and bye for now.